And today is the last Sunday of 2024. As we look back over the past year, we often share a similar reflection with one another. How did this year go by so quickly? It feels like 2024 passed in the blink of an eye. And James 4:14 reminds us that our life is like a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Why do you not even know what will happen tomorrow? What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Moses also describes the brevity of a life similarly in Psalm chapter 90, in verses 4 to 10. For 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. You sweep men away in the sleep of death. They are like the new grass of the morning. And though in the morning it springs up new, by evening it is dry and withered. And we are consumed by your anger and terrified by your indignation. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your presence. All our days pass away under your wrath. We finish our years with a moan. The length of our days is 70 years or 80. If we have the strength, yet their span is about trouble and sorrow. But they quickly pass, and we fly away. Although life is fleeting, it does not end there. The central message of today's passage is that after this life is over, there will be God's judgment. When our time on earth is complete, God will judge us based on our actions. The passage we read today is one we know very well, and it is often referenced in sermons. I'm sure that you heard this sermon before. On this final Sunday of the year, I hope that through this passage, we can take time to reflect on the year we have lived and resolve to serve the Lord with even greater diligence and sincerity, bringing glory to His name. May this be a precious and blessed time for all of us. The full content of the parable of the talent is as follows. In Matthew 25, in verses 14 to 30, Jesus tells the parable of the talents to illustrate the importance of faithfulness, responsibilities, wise stewardship of what God entrusts to His people, and finally, His judgment. The story begins with a man going on a journey and trusting his property to his servants. To one servant, he gives 5 talents, to another 2 talents, and to the last 1 talent each according to their ability. This distribution reflects the master's knowledge of his servants' capacities and their ability to manage his resources. After the master departs, the servants act very differently with what they have been given. The first servant, with received 5 talents, invests and gains 5 more. And similarly, the second servant doubles to 2 talents he was given. However, the third servant, fearful of losing the 1 talent he received, buries it in the ground and does nothing to increase it. When the master returns after a long absence, he calls the servants to count for their stewardship. The first servant presents 10 talents, and the master praises him, saying, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness." The second servant also reports doubling his 2 talents, and he receives exactly the same commendations and reward from the master. The third servant, however, returns only the 1 talent he was given. He explains that he was afraid of the master. So this was the first reason. So he appraised his master, whom he perceived as harsh and demanding, and therefore buried the talent. And according to the Bible, the master rebukes this servant, calling him, verse 26, wicked and lazy. He points out the even minimal effort, such as putting the money with the bankers to earn interest, would have been better than doing nothing. The master takes the 1 talent away from the servant and gives it to the servant with the 10 talents, and declaring in verse 29, "For everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him." And finally, unfaithful servant is cast into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, symbolizing the judgment and eternal separation from God. This parable emphasizes the importance of faithfully using what God has entrusted to us, whether it is time, abilities, or resources. It teaches that God rewards those who act boldly and responsibly, while fear, laziness, and inaction lead to judgment. This parable also highlights God's generosity in rewarding faithfulness and his justice in holding everyone accountable for their choices. As we reflect on this story, this passage we read, it challenges us to live as faithful stewards of God's gift using them for His glory and purposes. And it reminds us that one day, you and I, each one of us, before the Holy God, we will give an account of our lives to God, and their true joy and fulfillment come from serving Him wholeheartedly. Today's passage is a parable in which Jesus speaks about the judgment that will take place on the last day. From this passage, we learn three important truths. First, there will be a day of God's judgment for all of us. Second, if we all must stand before God's judgment seat, we must ask ourselves, how should we live? Third, we will all see the results of God's judgment upon us. Firstly, in Jesus' parable of the talents, we see that the day of God's judgment awaits everyone. Whether we like it or not, we will all find ourselves classified as belonging to the group of 5 talents, 2 talents, or 1 talent. The day when this distinction is made will be the day of our judgment. Jesus emphasizes the certainty of coming judgment day and the importance of being prepared for it. In verse 13, Jesus concludes the parable of 10 virgins with the warning, therefore keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour. And this verse shows that no one knows when the day of judgment will happen. So Jesus urges his followers to stay vigilant and ready at all times, as no one knows when he will return to judge the world. It serves as a reminder that our daily lives should reflect a constant state of spiritual preparedness. In verse 19, within the parable of the talents, Jesus describes the master's return after a long time. After a long time, the master of the servants returned, settled the account with them. Here, of course, the master represents Jesus, and his return symbolizes the day of judgment. And this verse illustrates that every individual will be held accountable for how they have used the gifts, opportunities, and responsibilities God entrusted to them. After a long time, the master of these servants returned and settled account with them. We've been waiting for our Lord Jesus Christ more than 2,000 years ago. And today, in verse 19, we find that after a long time, but our Lord Jesus Christ will come back surely. The act of settling accounts signifies the evaluation of each person's faithfulness and stewardship. My dear folks, the time is coming. One day, all of us each one of us will witness the return of Jesus Christ. Verse 30 reveals the consequences of unfaithfulness, and throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This verse describes the fate of the servant who squandered his opportunity to serve faithfully. The imagery of darkness, weeping, and gnashing of teeth symbolizes eternal separation from God and the anguish of regret. If you ask me, where is hell? The hell, when someone goes to hell, there is no God. And we can define that hell like this. This verse describes the fate of a servant who squandered his opportunity. And this verse from Matthew 25 underscores the certainty of Judgment Day, the need for constant spiritual vigilance, and the reality of accountability before God. Jesus calls his followers to live faithfully and responsibly, knowing that his return will bring both reward and judgment. And secondly, knowing that each one of us must stand before God's judgment seat, we must ask ourselves, how should we live? Or equally important, how should we not live? If we know that each of us must stand before God's holy judgment seat, Matthew teaches us how we should live. We are called to live faithfully, diligently, responsibly, using what God has entrusted to us for his glory and for his sake. In the parable, the faithful servants immediately put their master's resources to work, doubling what they were given. This demonstrates that we should live lives of action and purpose, investing our times, talents, and resources in ways that advance God's kingdom. For example, in Matthew 25:16, the servant who received 5 talents went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 more. His quick and purposeful action highlights the importance of initiative and effort. Similarly, in verses 20 and 22, both servants with the 5 talents and the one with the 2 talents joyfully report their success to the master. Their faithful stewardship results in praise and greater responsibility. This teaches us to live with a sense of accountability, knowing that our actions matter to God and their faithful service will bring reward. And particularly the Presbyterian Church, we do not talk much about God's reward, because we theologically concerned that a lot of people believes that our salvation comes from our deeds and actions. We are saved by the grace, by faith in our Lord Jesus Christ. Because of this reason, we do not talk about the reward. But today we see that our God reward his faithful servant. In contrast, Matthew 24-25 shows us how we should not live. The unfaithful servant buried his talent out of fear and mistrust, refusing to take responsibility or use what he was given. In verse 24, he accuses the master of being harsh, saying, "Master, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered the seed." Can you see his distorted view of the master? His view leads to inaction, which is a warning to us about the danger of mistrusting God's character and failing to see him as gracious and loving. Indeed, our God is a gracious and loving God. In verse 25, the servant explains, "So I was afraid, went out and hid your talent in the ground." This reveals the consequences of living in fear rather than using the resources entrusted to him. The servant avoids risk, responsibility, ultimately facing judgment for his inaction. And from these verses, we learn that we should live faithfully and actively and with purpose, making the most of what God has entrusted to us. At the same time, we must avoid living in fear, laziness, and distrust, which lead to missed opportunities and eventual judgment. This parable calls us to reflect, to trust in God, a faithful stewardship and commitment of advancing his kingdom in our daily lives, knowing that we will one day stand before him and give an account of how we have lived on this earth. Lastly, we all see the results of God's judgment upon us. And Jesus reveals that everyone will see the results of God's judgment based on how they have lived and used what he has entrusted to them. The contrasting outcome for the servants with the 5 or 2 talents and the servant with the 1 talent highlight the consequences of faithfulness and unfaithfulness. The faithful servants who received the 5 and 2 talents use their resources wisely and doubled what they were given. When the master returns, he praises both of them equally. Even the words, exactly the same words the master used in verses 21 and 23. "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness." This verse shows that God's judgment is based on our faithfulness. Not the amount of results produced. Both servants are commended for their diligence and are rewarded in three significant ways. And first, they receive the master's commendation, being called good and faithful. These words, all I want to hear on that day. I'm sure that good and faithful, these words, all you want to hear from the Lord. And this good and faithful, this reflects God's approval of their efforts. And second, they are given greater responsibility as the master entrusts them with more because of their proven faithfulness. It's very encouraging. God never ever asked us to be successful, but our God commands us to be faithful. They are invited to share in the Master's happiness, symbolizing eternal joy and fellowship with God. These rewards emphasize the blessing of living faithfully in obedience to God. In contrast, the servant with one talent chooses to do nothing with what he was giving, bearing it, and offering excuses for his inaction. The master responds harshly, calling him in verse 26, "You wicked, lazy servant." This servant's judgment highlights the consequences of fear, laziness, and irresponsibility. Can you see? And first, he faces condemnation as the master rebukes him for failing to use the resources entrusted to him. And second, he suffers loss as the one talent he had is taken away and given to the servant with the 10 talents. This illustrates that those who fail to act faithfully with what God gives them will lose even what they have. And lastly, the unfaithful servant experiences separation from God as he cast into the outer darkness where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. This symbolizes eternal separation from God and the anguish of regret. The results of God's judgment, as described in this parable, are clear. The faithful servants receive joy, commendations, and greater responsibilities, reflecting God's reward for faithfulness. In contrast, the unfaithful servant faces condemnation, lose, and separation because of his laziness and fear and failure to act. This parable challenges us to live as faithful stewards of God's gifts, knowing that we will one day stand before him and see the results of his judgment upon us. It is a call to trust God, use his blessings for His glory and live purposefully in His service. This is the last Sunday of the year. And I bless each one of you in the mighty name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of us may hear the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant," from the Lord on that day, the day of judgment. God bless you all.